بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله النبي الكريم اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم لا فهم لنا إلا ما فهمتنا إنك أنت الجواد الكريم وقل ربي زدني علما. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Thank you all for coming for the third dars, for the third class on the fiqh of halal consumption. Those of you who are with us from the beginning know that we covered in the first class the definitions of halal and zabiha and modern misconceptions, spiritual implications. In the second class, we spoke about ingredients, chemical changes, chemical compositions of items that we put in our body, what we consume, what we inhale, things that can be considered intoxicants. We also spoke about marijuana, CBD, and THC, the differences and sort of understanding them. In today's dars, inshallah, the objective will be to talk about slaughter methods, the Ahlul Kitab discussion, and a minor touching up on the discussion on seafood. I also want to just make clear that the purposes and the objectives of this dars is not to get into any area of controversy necessarily. It's not to discuss items that, of course, are controversial and what's going on in the world today, but it's to try to identify what is actually happening, what exists in the world today, and what the fuqaha and the ulama have said about various slaughter methods and kind of what's happening in the halal food industry as it exists today. Okay, so that's kind of the objective and the purpose. So there will be a lot less discussion today, and hopefully the images work. So I just want to start off by saying I've been having a terrible amount of technical issues today. So inshallah, we're just hoping that everything pans out till the end. There are some really, really important images. I hope that all of you can see, those of you at home and those of you that are here, inshallah. And then lastly, my PowerPoint, it's kind of fussy today. So if I am unable to check my notes as we're going through this, you'll notice me kind of going back and forth and stop sharing screen and sharing screen just to get it to work again. So I apologize ahead of time for all of that. Today is, however, going to be a slightly more heavier discussion in terms of sort of what we're going to cover, the areas that we're going to cover. And it requires a little bit extra than the previous session. So inshallah, we'll go right into it. And we'll be discussing the slaughter process. Is there any lines on this PowerPoint screen, like red lines?
No, but I think it's on the whiteboard.
I'm not sure. Do I have that on?
Yeah.
How do I turn that off? I'm not sure if I did that on accident, maybe. Yeah.
Go to your Zoom.
This is up here.
Yeah. Go to more and disable annotation for others down. Yeah, see those lines. I don't know why.
But it's not showing up, right? Or
Yeah,
people
it's on
are
the
seeing
Zoom
it?
only. Just stop sharing for a second and let's start sharing then. Maybe it should. Should be good now.
Okay, it's good. Okay, and Zoom is good. And we're good here. Okay, so inshallah. So what we're going to be discussing starting lesson 3 is the slaughter process. This is going to cover who is qualified to slaughter. So these are all the topics that we're going to discuss inshallah tonight. That's the objective, the takeaway. We'll take questions and answers at the end again, inshallah, just because we don't want this to convolute the discussions that we're having today. As you can see, it's going to be a pretty jam-packed session. So number one, how are animals slaughtered according to modern techniques? This doesn't necessarily mean the halal methodology, but what's existing in the halal in the meat industry. What are different methods used to harvest or slaughter an animal? This is going to include cattle, so beef, lamb and goat, and poultry, chicken. That's what we're going to cover, inshallah. What is the Islamic process of that same slaughter? So we'll be talking about industry practices and then Islamic practice, or like the acceptable Islamic practice. We'll be talking about shooting, basically hunting, cutting, which is the standard approach, and stabbing. We'll be discussing all of that, inshallah. Conditions of slaughter, meaning who is the qualified individuals or capable individuals who can do this. We will then take a slight shift and turn, and we'll discuss the Ahlul Kitab conversation, that this is often used as a rationale that, well, we live in America, so therefore the meat of Ahlul Kitab, or the meat of the people of the book, should be permissible for us to consume. And what that would, for a lot of people, translate to is that In-N-Out Burgers is okay, McDonald's is okay, Jack in the Box is okay, right? So these are some very prominent names I'm throwing out. And for many of us, we might have like a knee-jerk reaction and be like, what are you talking about? No way. But when you use that piece, right, when you use that rationale that this is the meat of Ahlul Kitab, this is sort of what, for some individuals, this is what that translates to. And then lastly, we will just briefly touch up on the discussion on seafood, inshallah. So right off the bat, as I have done in the previous classes, it's really important for us to understand what our stance is, our foundational principles. Where do we begin this conversation? We start from the Quran. This is the foundation for everything that we do, or the ahadith of the Nabi alayhi salatu wassalam. So in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, okay, in Surah Ma'idah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, I don't know what I did here. Okay. That حرمت عليكم الميتة والدم ولحم الخنزير وما أهل لغير الله به والمنخنقة والموقوذة والمتردية والنطيحة وما أكل السبع إلا ما ذكيتم. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us very clearly, okay, that what is permissible and what is impermissible for our consumption. Okay, we cannot eat al-mayta. Mayta is a dead animal. We spoke about this in the last class, that we cannot speak about an animal that you found like roadkill, that was already dead. This is very important for us to understand, because this is going to come up as a recurring theme. What happens if, and I gave this example, you come to your farm, right, and there's 50 sheep there, and you notice one of the sheep is already dead on the floor. You just got there that morning and you don't even know what happened, but he's dead, not breathing, no, eyes not working, no body movements, animal's dead. Now, can you come and just eat that animal? This is mayta. We will not consider that acceptable. Anyways, it continues, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and blood, we do not eat blood, and we don't eat pork. This is very clear. Okay, we don't eat pork. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues and he says, neither do we eat any animal over which any name other than the name of Allah has been taken. So if you kill an animal under the name of Jesus Christ, we wouldn't be able to eat that. If you slaughter an animal by the name of something else, right? Some idol or some false god or something else, it will not be acceptable. Okay. And then there's a specific group of categories that Allah then brings. Neither is it permissible to eat an animal that has been strangled. Okay, this is munkhaniqa. Or an animal which was struck with a direct blow. And this is very different. Inshallah, we're going to get into it, but I'm just trying to introduce you guys to the different types of animals which would not be okay to eat. Let's say you have a famous baseball pitcher and he can throw a 90-mile-per-hour baseball. And he hits a sheep in the side of the shoulders at 90 miles an hour, the animal dies on the spot. That would not be acceptable to eat. Blunt force, okay? And then, munkhaniqa al-mawqudha al-mutaraddiya, an animal which has fallen from a place. It fell to its death. Cannot eat that. Neither can you eat an animal which is, an-natiha is an animal which was gored, killed by another animal that you then go and try to eat. You cannot eat that animal. Or last category here, an animal which another animal has eaten, okay, or devoured or eaten up. Okay, so this is the basis. These are the five categories or so where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lays that foundation. Now, based on this, everything else follows. All of our rulings, machine slaughtered, hand slaughtered, vertical cut, horizontal cut, captive bolt stunning, everything that comes as a result will follow this guideline. Okay. So what are our Islamic conditions for slaughter? First and foremost, this is based on the ahadith and the Quranic method, the Sunnah method, the prophetic method. The name of Allah Azza wa Jal has to be taken at the time of slaughter. A Muslim has to be the slaughterman. Okay? The animal must bleed out after having the four main arteries in the throat cut, namely the esophagus, the trachea, the carotid artery, and the jugular vein. These four veins in the throat need to be cut. And as I'm saying this, okay, all you need to know is that when the throat is cut, especially if it's a trained slaughterman who is very experienced in this, he will be able to, in one single swipe, be able to reach almost the bone in the neck, meaning a full, complete cut with very much ease. And this method is the standard, historically practiced method of sacrificing or slaughtering or harvesting an animal for ages, thousands of years. This has been that practice. Okay. Internationally speaking, worldwide, right? Any other method would be considered unacceptable according to most Muslims, just based on their experiences, just based on what they see. So if you were to go to, any village on the top of a mountain and behind the ocean, and you ask them to slaughter an animal for you, how would they do it? It would be this method. It would be this standard, right? Historically proven method, prophetic method. Now, this is just some imagery to show you where they are in the throat. I know I used the example of a human, but the idea is that we have the same arteries in the throat and stuff. So it is hopefully sort of helpful. Actually, sort of not. Yeah, okay. So in the first image, you see the esophagus in the middle. That's there. In the second image, you see, oh, you don't see the trachea. Okay, well, I messed up on that one. It's okay. They're next to each other. And then in the third image, you see one of the carotid arteries. It's really hard with these images. So Khair, I apologize for that. But in any case, the point is that it goes from basically the left edge of the bone of the jaw all the way across to the right side of the jaw. There are veins on either side, right? And of course, the esophagus and the trachea is in the middle. You have the carotid artery, I think, on the right side and the jugular vein on the left side. And for a complete slaughter, you have to cut all four of these main arteries. Okay. And that's kind of what we're repeating here. This is what we're showing. This is the standard practice of slaughter, historically proven. No one on the face of this earth would disagree with. No Muslim would disagree with this slaughter practice. So now let's identify some of those concerning areas, problems in the halal industry, problems in the industry at large, okay? So due to higher demand for meat product, companies are looking to reduce costs. As a result, they develop newer, faster techniques to slaughter animals and to try to be as efficient as possible. And of course, this is not always going to be aligned with the traditional method of slaughter, meaning this might not be aligned with that practice of hand slaughtering, taking the name of Allah, Bismillah, Tasmiyah, hand cutting every animal. And remember, we're not talking about halal yet. We're talking about in general. Now, of course, Muslims are also large consumers of meat product, okay? Therefore, we also want meat. Now, I'm going to just put a pin on this for a moment and just drop a point here, an additional point that's worth understanding. When we look at the prices of meat and we're wondering why the costs of meat have gone up or the costs of meat are expensive for halal opposed to, not halal, it's because that when you have things happening where you have technology that is incredibly fast, efficient, quick, that can get an animal in and out and into processing to get skinned and cut and deboned and all of that in just a matter of minutes. And then you have this process where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillah, you have to say Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. You have to use your hand. You have to be a Muslim. You have to cut the animal, and then you can process it. You can understand that there's going to be a difference, meaning that the cost of physical labor of having a Muslim on board is going to be a little bit more than having, someone at home, work from home, of course, work from home hamburgers, pressing a button on the computer, and you have hundreds of thousands of chickens going through a conveyor belt, turned on from home, machine turns on automatically, bird goes through the process, and it's just like you have these, this thing, you've been to a classroom where you pulled a parda, you pulled a partition, and like chickens are going through that at like however 150 birds per minute, 200 birds a minute. Think about that. I'm gonna slow that down. 200 birds, chickens per minute, 60 seconds are being slaughtered on these conveyor belts, and there's no one there. There's a machine and it's just going. Now we're going to get into that, but my point is, of course, that's going to be cheaper. Of course. And then you have a Muslim and you have a person and he's doing due diligence and he's saying in the name of Allah. Okay. So I just wanted to put that there. Let that marinate in your minds. I have to not use food related examples here. Just think about that as we're having this conversation, because it's going to come up. Okay. It's going to continue to come up. So now when the Muslim community in certain areas in the world adopt some of these methods of industrializing or modernizing, you find often it does exist that your standard of halal becomes compromised. Certain things start to shift. Certain things aren't happening like that foundational point that we just mentioned. Okay. So now we're going to discuss some of those common slaughter methods. Again, this exists everywhere. This exists everywhere. Stunning. Okay. This is the process of applying a high-powered stun to the animal through the brain to kill the animal before further processing. And I want to also clarify what that means. Further processing means before the animal is cut up and skinned and cut into pieces and steaks and all that stuff. Before that happens, the animal has to die, obviously. And one way of doing so is by stunning them. Okay. And one method of that is by using a stun gun. Now, I know the image might not be the clearest, but here you have about 9 different types of stun guns. Okay. And I didn't include any videos because that would be a little bit graphic. And so I thought that it's best not to include any of that. But you can understand this is handheld, right? High powered. And you put it onto the head of the cattle. Okay. And you apply it and it stuns the animal. Okay. And this is one of the methods that are used. Now, unfortunately, the thing is, oftentimes this puts the animal in such a condition, in such a state that it's unrecoverable. Meaning the animal has no longer the ability to recover from that blow. So they oftentimes die as a result. Oftentimes. The second is captive bolt. Now, captive bolt, also known as penetrating captive bolt, is often used on cattle, sheep, and some pigs. A gun, but it doesn't look like a gun. It looks like a metal rod, like a microphone, like those long microphones. And it's placed on the head of the animal, and a button is pressed, and it is a bullet. I think it's a 22 gauge or something, like a really small bullet that goes into the brain of the cattle, causing it to lose consciousness immediately, or to die. So it loses consciousness, and then they're able to process it. Now, I want to make mention here that I've seen this process firsthand. I've seen actually almost all of these processes firsthand, almost all of them. I went to a slaughterhouse. I visited it on my own time, right? I drove my own car and I went all the way and I saw a couple of these slaughterhouses, the process, and I saw this exactly. This is a captive bolt here. Okay. I saw this one. I think I saw letter C, that last one. It was either C or B, one of these I remember. And let me just say that that animal doesn't look like it just died, okay, once that was applied or administered. It definitely does not look like the animal just died, you know? So, but in any case, I'll leave my sentiments out of it. The point is that this is another method that's used, penetrating captive bolt. It fires into the head, oftentimes cracks the skull open is what it does, goes to the brain, animal's unconscious. And then there are other methods as well, okay? But this is a point that I want to kind of like just bring a little bit of attention to. So the image you see on the left is a knock box. It's known as a knock box. Basically what this is the animals are driven in. So the cow is driven in and his head sticks out of a little window, sort of like on the image to the right. And either mechanically its head fits in and then the button is pressed and the animal's head is lifted, or the animal is flipped upside down. And I think the image on the left is the one where the animal is rotated. It's a 180 knockbox. So animal walks in, the machine is turned. So now it's upside down. So basically its throat is just standing there. And a Muslim, what he'll do, he'll just take the knife and Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, one swipe over just like that because the throat is upside down, right? It's not like this, it's like this. So with the blade, you'll just come Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, one time over. And in the image to the left, it's a very simple process. And in other places, they may not have the 180 rotating one, so they'll have this image on the right where the animal walks in, puts its hand through a little window, the machine automatically lifts it up, and then the slaughterman comes from underneath, Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, right there, and the animal is slaughtered. Now, it's important to understand that the mashayikh and the ulama are unanimous on this point, that the meat of an animal which can be subdued would be unlawful to consume if it is killed without cutting those vessels. Okay, so my point is, in the previous examples, we saw a stun gun and we saw a captive bolt, and that those 4 veins in the throat were not often cut. So what happens is once the animal dies, they go to immediately process it. What that means is the animal is not allowed to bleed out as best as it could. Therefore, a lot of that blood remains inside, and sickness and all these issues that come as a result come from that. Not to mention, of course, this is not the Islamic practice. Okay. So then, other common slaughter methods with cattle specifically is known as the vertical cut. And I want you guys to take a look at this, also known as the European cut. Okay. Now, this process is very specific. There's a couple of reasons why this is practiced in modern cattle slaughter. But I will just mention first and foremost how this is different than the other slaughter. Now you can read for yourselves here, but essentially what it is the knife is put in, starting from the heart of the animal, cut up, ending at the throat. Oftentimes not severing the 4 main arteries in the throat. So then what happens as a result is, first and foremost, the animal does not bleed out. Number 2, the animal's in agony. You stabbed it in the heart. Number 3, that veins in the throat are not cut, so they're not severed. And then, of course, the animal doesn't bleed out. So then all that blood remains inside. The other interesting thing is you might be asking, well, why would you adopt this approach? Now, the second sort of benefit for why this is adopted as a method of slaughter is to protect the animal hide, the skin, the leather. Now, if you cut the animal this way, it makes it much harder and it ruins the hide of that animal. Whereas if you cut it upwards like this, it doesn't ruin it, preserves it. And you can actually take that back from the animal, and it actually helps a lot because there's secondary profits, right? Not just the meat of the animal. Then you take the hide, you tan it, you make leather from it. There's all these additional benefits. So this European cut here, this vertical cut method, also benefits them in this way that they can take the animal skin. Whereas the standard cutting the throat horizontally, right, which is that standard practice, ruins the hide oftentimes, doesn't give them the best skin. Now, with that being said, you can see clearly, and of course the mashayikh have also spoken about this very clearly, that this process is not acceptable according to those standards that we explained earlier. That 4 of those arteries must be slaughtered. Okay, 4 of those arteries must be slaughtered. It must be cut. The animal needs to drain. The animal needs to bleed out, etc. So many of the scholars, and this is not just like a rare opinion, the majority of the scholars have given this opinion that animals that are cut in this format would not be considered halal according to the majority opinion of Islamic slaughter. And therefore, you would not be able to use that animal's meat. So with chicken, there's also a different slaughter process with poultry, known as mechanical slaughter or mechanized slaughter. Okay. So chickens are transported to the place of slaughter on a conveyor belt, like I explained to you. I have a picture for you. I forgot to highlight it here, but if you can follow along, the second sentence says, these chickens, after passing through extremely cold water, arrive at the place where there's a gyratory plate, a blade or knife cuts the chickens. Thereafter, the chickens move along to the other stages of cleaning, cutting, packaging, etc., also known as processing. This is what that looks like. Okay, so I think this is animals that have just become slaughtered, but the main point is look at the process in which the animals come in. Now, that's not shocking. I mean, that's the standard protocol. The animals are brought in. There's too many birds, right? You can't bring them all in your hands, right? So they go through a conveyor belt. You see how they're all upside down, hanging by their feet. They come in alive. They follow the steps. As they follow this track, then there are stages, right? So the animals, hypothetically, they come in from this door. They come in. This line is moving. This line is moving. It's not stopping. This line is moving. Okay. Okay. For those of you who are in here, if you just look up, there's a track here. It would follow that track. Okay. If birds come in. While that line is moving, there is a stationary rotary blade, a circular spinning blade that is spinning and it's stationary. It's not moving, meaning it's not moving around. The blade is in one location and it's just spinning. The placement of that rotary blade and the chain or the line of birds coming in is in such a way that as the birds are coming, their throats are supposed to be cut by this rotating blade as the chickens pass through. That's the idea. Okay. Now that you guys understand that, that's the mechanical slaughter process. Okay. We're going to describe that a little bit more. Now, in this section, there's about 8 slides. I hope to summarize them for you. There's a lot of material on the slides itself that you can take a moment, read. We'll slow it down a bit. That's okay. But I'm going to summarize them for you. I'm not going to necessarily read through everything, or at least I hope not to. It might be a little cumbersome. But remember, first and foremost, there are conditions to slaughter. Okay. Now, of course, we're talking specifically about the machine slaughtered process. The throat, the veins in the throat need to be cut. We spoke about that. That's point A. Point B, the name of Allah needs to be taken, Bismillah, right, at the time of slaughter. C, the person has to be a slaughterman, right, a Muslim slaughterman, okay? All of these conditions, they need to happen individually and separately, meaning every single individual animal needs all 3 of those conditions, okay? Meaning, for every single animal you bring forward, there needs to be a Bismillah, Tasmiyah. There needs to be a Muslim slaughterman. There needs to be a, what is the third? The throat that needs to be cut, right? All the veins in the throat need to be cut. Now, there is a little bit of a difference of opinion if all 4 need to be cut in some of the madhabs, but for the sake of a discussion, let's just say all 4 of the veins in the throat need to be cut, okay? So now at the second to last bullet point, I want to bring your attention there. Some people argue that taking the tasmiyah, the name of Allah, is not required. And here's where we are going to start our discussion against why this methodology would not be acceptable according to the mashayikh and the scholars. Okay? So remember, that's number 1. This is the first objection or complaint that we have about the mechanized process of slaughter, that the tasmiyah is left out. Now, there's a lot of discussion here about what the mashayikh and the scholars say, how they define it, how they explain it, about the various madhabs, how they differ. But what's really important to understand, the summary is, if the tasmiyah at the time of slaughter, now I want to also clarify that tasmiyah means to say Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. For those of you who don't know, this is a shorthand way of saying it. So when I say tasmiyah, what I'm saying is when someone says Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. So at the time when someone is slaughtering an animal, if you intentionally say, I am not going to say the tasmiyah, according to the majority of the ulama, that animal is not okay to eat. And according to the Shafi'i madhab, right, it will also not be permissible to eat. However, in the Shafi'i school, if a person doesn't make it a habit or they forget, right, then it would also be acceptable. If they don't make it a habit, okay, it will be considered makruh or disliked, but as long as it's not a habit, then it would not be impermissible. If they forgot or if they didn't say it once or twice, that's still okay. This is according to the ulama of the Shafi'i school. But according to the rest of the mashayikh, the Hanafi school, Maliki school, and the Hanbali school, it would not be acceptable to eat the meat of an animal which the name of Allah was intentionally left out. Number two reason why we have some concerns with this mechanical slaughter process that I'm explaining to you is that understand that that bird, when it comes in on that belt, it's alive. It's a living animal. It's a bird. And now it's seeing things, colors, lights, noises it's never seen before. And of course, as it gets closer to the blade, it gets very loud. So it's very possible that as this bird is coming, right, and here's the rotating blade, as this bird is coming, at the moment it's supposed to come to the blade to get cut, it flaps its wings, it moves, and it pushes itself away from the blade as it's moving. Remember, it's moving. That belt never stops moving. It's very important to understand. It never stops moving. It keeps going. So as this is coming and the chicken is coming, it's supposed to come to the blade. It moves away. It moves itself away from it. Or it moves in such a fashion that its wing gets cut, its stomach gets cut, but its throat does not get cut. Meaning that the animal was never cut, killed. The throat was never cut or killed. Okay. So it's important to understand that's another issue. This could happen. Now, I want to just take a moment there and explain that process. If an animal were to go through that, a chicken were to go through that rotating blade, its throat gets cut, you can say the animal died. But the matter of the tasmiyah being taken on every single bird as that's happening, that doesn't exist, number one. Number two, in this particular instance, if the bird misses the blade, what happens? The next step after the slaughter is the defeathering, which means this now living chicken goes into a vat of boiling hot water to get defeathered, which means for all the feathers to come off, with a bunch of dead chickens. So now what happens to that chicken? It drowns. It drowns. Now that's haram. That would not be permissible chicken to eat if it drowns. Okay? Now you have a drowned chicken in a vat full of slaughtered chickens. Now there's this cross-contamination issue. That's like if something haram touches something halal, makes the halal thing haram now, right? Cross-contamination. That same thing now happens to this entire batch of dead chickens. You see, this is the second concern we have. The third concern, or following up, is that, like I said in the beginning, not all of the birds get that tasmiyah. Okay. Now there's a lot of different reasonings that are given, rationale that are given, that we say it in the beginning, it counts for all of them. Now I will explain. I have heard and seen a lot of interesting things about this. I have seen where a man will come, Muslim even, he will bless the truck in which the chickens haven't even gone to slaughter yet. And from a distance, he'll say, Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, and he'll leave. And the truck is sitting in the driveway. and he'll go home. The chickens go to where they go. There's been other instances where, the person who's starting the machine in the morning for that blade to turn on, he'll say, Bismillah, Allahu Akbar on the first one, turn on the machine, and he'll go home until tomorrow morning. Then he comes back, or that night when he turns off the machine, then he comes back tomorrow morning, and for the next batch, he'll turn it back on. The condition for dhabh to be acceptable is every single animal needs a tasmiyah by a Muslim with all 4 of the veins in the throat cut. The basis for this is this ayah of the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا مِمَّا لَمْ يَذْكُرِ اسْمُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ يُذْكَرِ اسْمُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ. So this ayah, that do not eat from that which the name of Allah has not been taken upon, is our foundation for why that would not be acceptable, right? Or why that would be problematic, okay? Following up with that point, okay, is that the pronouncement of the tasmiyah on that bird and the slaughter, what kind of distance in time should there be? Let's say it's 8 o'clock, it's 8:45, and I'm standing and I say, Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. And then an hour later, I go to slaughter the animal. Does that Bismillah count for that slaughter or not? Okay. So this point is that when the slaughterman turns on the machine and he says, Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, and it kills the first chicken, maybe the first chicken you can say is halal slaughter. But what about the tens of thousands of other birds that follow through? Okay. It will not render all of the chickens to be considered halal because you're pressing it only on the first one and not on the rest of them. Okay. And there's a separation of hours and days from when that first man says Bismillah Allahu Akbar to the next time he says Bismillah Allahu Akbar. And it's not like it counts. You say it 6 o'clock in the morning today, 6 o'clock in the morning tomorrow, everything in between becomes halal. It doesn't work like that. Another point here, that there has to be the person who is doing the slaughter has to be the one who is saying the tasmiyah. It cannot, because there's a connection between that. Your Bismillah Allahu Akbar is connected to the slaughter practice, the action of your hand that is going to take place immediately afterwards. So therefore, if you are not connected in that sense, meaning I am saying it and he is doing it, there's a disconnect here. And that disconnect will also render that process invalid. And that's what this slide talks about. He did not switch the machine on, neither did he turn the blade, nor move the chicken towards the blade. He is merely like an individual who was passing by a slaughterman who was slaughtering his animal. There's no connection, right? If a person is outside, let's say a disbeliever, some non-Muslim, standing outside slaughtering a sheep, and you just happen to be jogging that day. As he puts the knife to the head of the sheep, you pass it, Bismillah Allahu Akbar, and he slaughters the animal. That was a drive-by tasmiyah. That doesn't do anything. That guy's not a Muslim. What does your tasmiyah have anything to do with his slaughter? Nothing. Similarly, the person and the machine is a very big disconnect. And of course, with everything else we mentioned, we can clearly see how because of that disconnect, that would render that bird slaughtered as not meeting those conditions for halal slaughter, as we've discussed. And of course, this is another major point, that this is not like pro hand slaughtered, anti mechanical slaughtered, pro one, anti the other. It's all about which process meets the conditions of the deen. And oftentimes it becomes an emotional argument, and I understand that, right? Because it's almost as if we're targeting the individual person's iman when we say, hey, I don't eat a mechanically slaughtered product because I don't believe that what I've learned meets that standard requisite that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught us in the Quran and the ahadith of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And so for that reason, I don't feel comfortable with that. It's almost as if that person that you're saying this to feels like you're attacking their sense of faith, their sense of iman, their sense of being a Muslim. Whereas really, it's not an emotional argument. Okay? So it's not a case of favoring one over the other, but it's just if the conditions are not met, the conditions are not met. And if the conditions are met, then the conditions are met. How amazing would it be if there was a facility that could process 200 birds a minute, okay, in such a fashion, in such a way that it all met the conditions? Everybody would be supporting that. No one would be against that. And the rule, the usul is, right, al-asl fil ashya'i al-ibaha. That the rule is that everything is considered permissible, halal, except meat. Okay? Initially, the rule is all things are deemed permissible except meat until you find out, meaning until you find out. So let's say you go to a guest's house, they offer you some cookies and they offer you a little candy and they offer you some chai. For you, that's permissible. You eat that. You can eat that. You don't need to investigate that. Right? It's a Muslim person, it's an individual you know or whatever. You eat that. There's no concern there. Okay? Then you happen to find out, or you then do some research later on, then you're like, oh, that was not okay. Oh, okay, then from that moment on, then I won't eat. That rule does not apply to meat. And the ruling is here in this hadith, and we'll read this. Adi ibn Hatim radiallahu ta'ala anhu said to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, O Messenger of Allah, at times I let go of my hunting dog, but I find with it another dog, and I am unaware which of the two hunted the animal that I was after. So the Prophet ﷺ said, don't eat from the hunted animal, the one that you hunted, you intended to hunt. Why? Because the dog that was a hunting dog that you sent and another random dog both went to go get that, and you don't know which one got that animal, which one killed the animal ultimately. So he says, for you pronounce the name of Allah on your dog only and not on the other dog, which means on meat. The point of that is that meat you have to verify first before consuming. That was the takeaway of that hadith. That is the basis. This is the basis for which we say that. So the usul, or the foundational point, or the maxim when it comes to eating, is that if it's non-meat items, you eat first and then you can investigate. But when it comes to meat items, the usul is here, that you investigate first. This is the foundational point. So when there is doubt in the animal being halal, it is unlawful to consume it. Otherwise, if it was the other way, al-asl fil ashya al-ibaha, if the rule was that everything initially is that it's all good and then you investigate later, then why would the Prophet ﷺ command Adi ibn Hatim to not eat from that animal? Because there was doubt that existed. And when doubt exists, it is not lawful to consume of that meat. Okay. So now we're going to slowly transition to, so those were all the processes of slaughter, kind of the issues that are contemporary issues, modern day issues, things that come up like that. And now we're going to talk about the types of slaughter. So shooting and hunting, cutting or dhabh by hand, and stabbing, also known as nahr. Inshallah, we'll cover that now. So first and foremost is the condition of the slaughterman, that the slaughterman needs to be sane, they need to be Muslim, and that they need to know what they're doing. It does not need to have bulugh. They don't need to have bulugh. According to the mashayikh, that child does not need to be hitting the age of puberty, but they need to be a mahir of their skill. They need to know what they're doing. They need to know what I'm killing, how to kill, that whole process. For many of us, if it's, the first time we slaughtered an animal, maybe our hand was weak. It wasn't applying enough pressure. The first time we've slaughtered, maybe we didn't know we cut the wrong area. Instead of cutting forward, instead of cutting backwards, like to us, we would cut forward. And I've seen this, or for example, for a sheep, they're very woolly, ironic that they're very woolly, and you have to kind of like move the wool out of the way till you find the neck and then you cut. So there's a lot of mistakes that a person who's unskilled will make. Doesn't matter if you're 30, 40 years old or you're a 13-year-old young man or young woman. So the point is, the conditions for slaughter are you're sane, you're a Muslim, and that you know what you're doing. Okay, these are the conditions for slaughter. So the first category we're going to talk about is hunting. Okay. Now, the basic rules in regards to hunting, and this is a short summary, of course, going into like the detailed fiqh of it and breaking it all down, the analysis of all that, inshallah, we can do later with the proofs and the dalils or the ahadith, etc. It's just slightly, I just summarized that. I mean, of course, that's still there, but I've summarized that here. That if you're hunting, obviously now with a rifle, okay, that at the time of firing the gun, the name of Allah Azza wa Jalla is taken. Number two, once the animal is shot, one should go in pursuit of the animal to then slaughter it as well. If the animal is found alive, it should be slaughtered, made dhabh of. If the animal is dead on arrival, it would be deemed as halal to eat. However, there are conditions. If the animal died due to the wound afflicted and the loss of blood, and not due to the sheer impact of the bullet, because remember, one of those methods of slaughter was that blunt force. So we spoke about one of the principal points here. منخنقة والموقوذة. So al-mawqudha is that a direct blow or a blunt force blow. Okay, certain bullets have flat tips, which are body piercing, flesh piercing. Others hit by force or impact. Okay, these are different types of bullets. Certain scholars have actually went in and made their own bullets so that it would be, for hunting, it would be permissible. Okay, and of course the point of that is to meet these conditions here, which is A, if the animal died due to the wound afflicted and not due to the sheer impact, because then that would be blunt force. Okay, and then B, one continued in pursuit of the animal after shooting it until it was found. If the process of searching for the animal was not continuous and that it was halted for even a short while, the animal will not be deemed to be halal. What that means is, let's say you shot an animal, and instead of immediately going and looking after that animal to then slaughter it or to see its condition, you waited like 5 hours. You had lunch first, and then you went, and then you found the animal died. That would not be acceptable. Why? Because of now that jahala of the not knowing what killed the animal. Was it my bullet? Was it blunt force? Was it another animal? Was it an insect? Was it another hunter? Was it another dog? All of those reasons, because of the delay from the time that it was shot until the time you found out that it was dead, will deem it impermissible. Okay. Now that's the conditions on hunting. As for the conditions of cutting or dhabh, okay, the standard practice, the name of Allah must be taken. Muslim slaughterman should be the one doing it. The animal must bleed out. This is a duplicate of the earlier slide. All 4 of the main arteries should be cut. Okay. Of course, this is the process for all animals. So goat, sheep, lamb, beef, chicken, it all has that same condition. Now, one thing I want to mention that's actually worth noting here, it's really relevant, is that earlier I spoke about the mechanical slaughtered process, that they can do up to 200 birds a minute on this line, this chain that just goes, and this machine is just spinning. I want to mention to everyone that having experience working in the halal food industry, I want to share that this is not exclusively only something that can be achieved by machine process only. Meaning, there are facilities that exist today that many of us have probably consumed the chicken, the meat of that, where the birds are slaughtered at 150 birds a minute, and in other places up to 200 birds a minute, 180, 190 birds a minute. And they're slaughtered how? By hand, by a Muslim, taking the name of Allah on every single chicken that comes through that belt. By Allah's fadl and mercy, I am very proud to say I've seen that process with my own eyes. I saw it with my own eyes. Wallahi, it was like, truly a very astonishing thing to see. You don't believe it until you see it. It's one of those kind of things. So the point is that in some instances, hand slaughtered chicken can even beat the mechanically slaughtered blade process. It's efficient. It can be done. It is just demand-based. That's all that it is. So the price differences, all those sort of, it's purely demand based. If every single person today took 10 other people with them today and said, from now on, we're only eating the hand slaughtered chicken product, for example, very quickly, you will see a shift in pricing because the demand, as much as the demand increases, the product will be made available. So it's not like, oh, we just can't do it. It's more like, do I want to eat that? Do I want to make that available for myself? Then here's the movement that I'm going to be a part of. This is the activity or the practice or the product or the brand that I'm going to support. Why? Because I know that process. Okay. So it's important that we understand that. Okay. Okay. So that was cutting. Oh, sorry. And so the process of that was that how would you do that by hand? And how would you compete with the blade? You just have more slaughtermen. You have 9, 10, 15, 20 slaughtermen standing back to back. Okay. So, you'll have one slaughterman, right? The line is coming here. And in certain places, you'll have it to where there's two belts coming on either side. Okay. And so what happens is you'll have one slaughterman standing here, taking every chicken as it comes, Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, and then the bird goes. As the next bird comes, he grabs it by the throat, Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. The next bird comes, Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. The next one comes, same thing. And he's just doing that continuously as the bird comes. Remember, the belt never stops. But exactly behind him, right, there's another belt coming. And so that person behind him is taking it, doing the exact same thing. As the bird comes, he's slaughtering it. So you have 15 of those individuals, 20 of those individuals who rotate every 10 to 20 minutes. Why? Because, of course, you're going to get tired. 20 minutes of doing this, try doing this 20 minutes, every single day for 20 minutes. And then, see how much it doesn't burn your hands. You do that, you take turns, you switch out. You have 20 people doing that. SubhanAllah, like it can be done and it can compete and it can even be faster and more efficient. And then there's stabbing, and this is not very common, but it's worth mentioning because it still happens and it's acceptable, known as nahr. Nahr is done for camel. Nahr is done for camel. Why? Because camels have a flap right beneath their neck that if you stab that, it is the same area where the esophagus is and the arteries in the throat, where it'll have direct access to pumping all the blood out. And if you've ever seen a traditional camel slaughter, you'll see exactly that. Either you have a very skilled slaughterman who can navigate between the camels and just slit their throats, or you see that they stab them right there in the centerpiece right beneath their throat, which will activate that same area, cut that same area, and they will start gushing out bleeding. You can see both. And as a matter of fact, if anyone has the heart for it, you can YouTube it. It's available all on YouTube. There's no regulations there. This is not used for any other animals. There is a difference of opinion here in one of the madhabs, but even the mashayikh of that madhab clarified that this is not done on other animals. This is largely done exclusively for camel. Okay. So now I understand we're a little short on time, but and we're slowly getting to our time. But I hope to address this topic, and then if need be, the seafood discussion we can have next week at the final dars. But I want to make sure that we at least get through this, and I know we're already cutting it close. It's very important for us to understand. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, اليوم أحل لكم الطيبات وطعام الذين أوتوا الكتاب حل لكم وطعامكم حل لهم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the food of those people who have been given the scripture of the adyan, the various religions before you, is halal for you, and your food is halal for them. Okay, وَطَعَامُكُمْ حِلٌّ لَهُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says here specifically, it's important that we identify ta'am, food. Okay, it's important to understand that it's food. Okay, it's really important to also understand that that their food is halal for you, but it doesn't mention anything about specifics, what they have to do, that they have to do anything else. And this is where a lot of the confusion arises. And I'm going to clarify that. I'm going to clarify that, what that means. Okay. Before I do that, this book is a really great reference. If anyone wants to know basically this entire section, pretty much almost this entire slide today, presentation, you should purchase this book. You can find it on Amazon, you can find it online. The title is The Islamic Laws of Animal Slaughter by Mufti Taqi Osmani. Very, very important. The information here is just unbelievable. Okay. Now, what this means, ta'am, is referred to, the food is specifically for properly slaughtered meat. This is the tafsir of that word. The mashayikh and the ulama have mentioned that when the Quran says, وَطَعَامُ طَعَامُ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ حِلٌّ لَكُمْ, that the food of the people who have been given the scripture are permissible for you, this is referring to dhabh, meat that has been slaughtered according to what you and I will consider proper Islamic slaughter. This is what the tabi'een, this is what their understanding, the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, this is how they understood what that meant. Okay. Now, what's really important is we need to ask ourselves this question. We say it's people of the book, Ahlul Kitab, it's acceptable to eat. Now, this question is necessary to be asked and for us to reflect over. If a Jew or a Christian, now to be very clear, that is who Ahlul Kitab is, the Jews and the Christians. If a Jew or a Christian was to prepare food with pork in it, would a Muslim consider that to be okay? Because that's what he eats. That's his food. No, Muslims would not accept that, right? So now if a Jew or a Christian prepares food, ta'am, we're saying food, right? Food of the people of the Ahlul Kitab. So they make food for you with wine. Would any Muslim eat that food saying, oh, it's Ahlul Kitab? No, Muslims will not eat that. Okay. So we understand that. So if they hypothetically told you that this meat that I bought is the meat that I, in Mongolian culture, I wanted to mention this because, unless we give examples, it might be really difficult to tell. In Mongolian culture, in a lot of the villages, in the outskirts, not the city, where people still live in huts and they're nomadic, etc. One very special way of preparing a meal of a sheep, like if you're gonna have a guest and you're gonna prepare a meal for a guest, one very, very special, a lot of izzat and honor to them is they take the animal, they cut its testicles off, and they hold that area that they cut off and allow the animal to die by that being strangled or whatever you want to call that. That's how the animal dies. They keep everything inside. The blood, everything. And this is considered a great honor that he prepared a meal for you like this. So when we talk about strangulation, right? Different ways that animals die. Now, if a Jew or a Christian, now I doubt that individual in the mountains is a Jew or a Christian, but let's just say hypothetically a Jew or a Christian prepares you meat from an animal which was strangled. Would any Muslim eat that? No, because it clashes with your understanding. Okay. And of course, there's no tasmiyah, right? There's no name of Allah being taken. Now you have all of these proofs, all these points of consideration. How then can a person say, oh, well, it's Ahlul Kitab? We're going to eat the food of Ahlul Kitab. This is just one point of consideration. Now, this is another important thing to keep in mind on a very practical level. If you read that book, you'll see Mufti Taqi Osmani did very detailed analysis of the slaughterhouses in America in like the 70s and the 80s. Not much has really changed. Can a person conclusively say that America is a Christian country? Not really, no. Is it a Jewish country? Definitely not, right? Could you say that America, the slaughterhouses that are run by Jews or Christians are done in that traditional sense? That the 4 veins are cut, the name of God is taken, that the individual can be a God-fearing person or whatever, believe in their religion. Matter of fact, one of my dear friends, Mawlana Kothar, shared with me a story about how a particular Jew shared that he's a rabbi, but he's an atheist. Because he's a rabbi by profession, but by belief, he is nothing in that regard. And now you have a rabbi. He's the one who blesses the meat. He's the one who makes it kosher. He's the one who we rely on and say it's Ahlul Kitab. And he doesn't even believe in God. Now, my point is that's potentially a one-off situation. I totally get that. But it's worth noting that this is what we're relying upon. Current Western slaughterhouses are in several violations of Islamic law to make that product halal, right? Mechanical slaughter does exist. The name of Allah is not being taken. The death of an animal by electrocution, by, being hit by something very directly. And then, of course, the other points that I just mentioned. How is that meal prepared? How is that food prepared? A Muslim would not eat that if the meat was strangled, right? So when we say strangled, we're talking about like direct force. Like we mentioned in the ayah of the Quran, if an animal's hit with direct force or blunt force and he dies like that, or if you shoot an animal and the gun doesn't pierce its flesh and it just hits them with force and it dies, well, you can't eat that. Now, if an animal is being slaughtered in a Jewish or Christian slaughterhouse, or not even Jewish or Christian slaughterhouse, in a slaughterhouse where they happen to be Jewish or Christian individuals, they're going to use a mushroom stunner. They're going to use that captive bolt, hit it in its head and kill it. And then they're going to say that that's halal or that's going to be kosher, right? So these are a lot of reasons, a lot of concerns to be extra careful about using that reasoning or that rationale about it's food of Ahlul Kitab. And with this much extensive research, plus, if you read the text, that text further just essentially quotes Mufti Taqi Osmani, basically goes into much more detail in describing what he saw, how many people have said that we don't even believe in God, right? These Christians and these Jews, they don't even believe in God. The slaughtermen don't even believe in God. They don't practice the traditional processes of slaughtering a product, killing an animal, etc. So with all of that in mind, it violates all of the mandates that are found in the Quran of that slaughter, which would make it okay for us to eat. Okay. So, and I will stop here actually, as a matter of fact. It's a little bit early, but I think this is a good place to stop because I don't want to rush the next slide, which is on the seafood discussion. But I'll end on this paragraph here that if Muslims are, to bring about change, then they must stand confidently united on these basic issues and areas of concern. Only through a firm and unified voice will Muslims be able to modify the current industry to comply with halal standards. And this is very, very important for us to understand. The world that we're living in today in this exact moment is a shifting world. Right now, there are all these major tech companies that have kitchens in their stores, in their companies. Facebook has its own kitchen. Google has its own kitchen. PayPal has its own kitchen. A lot of these companies have their own restaurants, their own kitchens from the company. And yet they don't have a halal option. You say halal option, but what I mean to say is they don't have a halal station. Why is that? You think that Muslims don't work at Apple? Come on. At least 50% of those population is Muslim, somehow or another, right? The workforce in the tech industry, mashallah, the community is growing. Are there not Muslims that are there? Must be. There must be. And when we read all this, we get scared a little bit. Like, man, what should I do? What is the next step for me? What would I possibly do then? Right? The answer is that we have to be confident enough that when we say we believe in this and this is the standard that we want to adopt in our lives, and we maybe didn't know this before, but now we're learning this. And as we learn this, the next step is to bring about that change. We have to be individually demanding this and demanding this change. College campuses have dormitories. You pay thousands of dollars in tuition every single year for that college education. And yet you're eating Snickers and Gatorade for lunch, and those other guys are having a roast beef sandwich. That was my pathetic experience in college. I was having M&Ms, bags of chips, Gatorade, bottled water here and there. This is my lunch. What else are you going to eat? It's tough. I get that. It's very hard. So khair, inshallah, we'll conclude here for this slide on the slaughter processes. And inshallah, next week, we will cover seafood, of course, but we will also cover practical implications on our life, children, and iman, meaning what can we do about it? Inshallah, this is the plan for next week. Next week, we will also conclude the dars as well. This will be the end of the 4-week session. Inshallah, we'll have some announcements there, but what we'll talk about is practical ways that we can bring about change in our lives, how we can take care of ourselves, our children, and preserve our iman. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, so we'll take some Q&A inshallah right now. Yeah. All right. Cool. So anyone who needs to leave, of course, can leave. Class is over, dars is over, but anyone who wants to ask some questions, inshallah, we'll try to take some of the questions here. I'll try to answer with the best of my ability. If I don't know the answer, I won't answer it. Question came, can you slaughter with your left hand? Yes, that's fine. Recordings of the earlier sessions available. Will we make those sessions available, inshallah? So check back into the website, inshallah. We'll follow up and stay in touch with that, but we're going to decide and determine whether or not the previous lessons will be available, inshallah. Yeah. I'm gonna keep going through them. I'm just gonna go back and forth, inshallah. Yeah.
I have a question regarding somebody when it comes to hunting. I know those are the classes about making sure not to sleep, but I'm not talking about which part of the animal should be struck so that the blow does not kill that animal from the shot. Using steam hunting.
To be honest, I didn't read upon that. I didn't read specifically about where to hunt the animal, specifically like where to shoot that on. Inshallah, I could definitely look into that and then have, try to come up with an answer for that or look into that for next week, inshallah. Yeah, barakallahu feekum. So if you decapitate an animal, it's not liked, it's actually makruh to do so, to cut the head off of an animal. It would still technically be okay, but it's not preferred. Inshallah, the questions with regards to where you can find the product or know and learn about individual products we'll discuss next week. So inshallah, I'll answer those questions for next week. I'm going up, inshallah. So I'm gonna go up before I go back down. So is machine slaughter not permissible and haram? I'm not going to tell you decisively what is considered halal and haram. If you remember in the slide, what we spoke about, it was not about making being a bias towards one or the other, but it's essentially which of those conditions are being met, which ones are not being met. If you see that in the machine slaughter process, the processes that we spoke about are being met, then alhamdulillah. But if you're finding that it is not that way, and based on this presentation you found, or at least according to what I've shared, you see that it's not meeting it, then it's best to avoid that altogether. In and out is not halal. So I knew that question was coming. Okay, so there's another question. Yes, so when you're hunting, so that's what we spoke about. If you go and you're hunting or you shoot an animal, you shoot it with a bow and arrow, you shoot it with your gun, and you immediately after you go to look for your hunt and you find the animal has not yet died fully, you should make dhabh of that animal. Yes, you should make dhabh of that animal. That is best practice to do so. Okay, there's a couple more questions that are coming, but I want to just make sure I can take it from the room as well. If you hunt the animal, can we eat that animal if it's found dead? Yes, so that was also found. That when you say Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, you hunt the animal and you find that it's dead, you can still eat that animal, correct? No, the animal does not have to be faced towards Qibla, but it's best practice. The question about what type of bullets. Now, I didn't really look into the details of which kind. All I know is that there are certain bullets that are designed, like the questioner asked, for it to go through. So it's armor piercing or flesh piercing bullets for penetration, correct? And then there's another one to expand inside the animal to cause damage. So clearly you would say that the ones that are full metal jackets, FMJs, are probably the better ones to go with, because then you'll know you'll get a clean shot out of it. If a food product has a non-halal ingredient in it, then it would not be permissible to eat. We discussed topic of cheese, breads, and enzymes in the last dars. If a chicken goes through some stunning beforehand slaughtered, is that okay to consume, or there are chances of some dying? So that should be monitored. In whatever way that happens, it should be monitored, because in certain places there is an electric shock that is given to chickens to turkeys to different products before they're slaughtered. But every bird should be monitored to ensure that they recover from the shock. There are ways to discover that. The USDA plant managers there at every facility monitor that. They double check to make sure that it's breathing, it's moving, its eyes, it pays attention to things that come its way. So they definitely pay attention to that. So technically, if you remember when I said earlier, it was non-reversible stunning, which means that once it's administered, the animal does not recover. Stunning, however, for certain processes of like, with regards to birds or poultry, it is reversible. And so if it is reversible, then it would be okay. Deer is halal to eat. All right, so I know these questions are never going to end, so let me take some from the room. Yeah.
There's certain slaughterhouses or certain ones you could recommend and certain ones you would not recommend.
We can discuss that next week, inshallah, since that's more relative to that topic. Yeah.
It's kind of more relevant to last week's topic.
So it's we can talk about that offline, inshallah, once it's offline. Oh, there's a question here. So question is, what happens if all 4 veins are not cut at once? So according to the Hanafi madhab, if the majority 3 of 4 are cut, then it's fine. I didn't check with the other madhahib, so I'd have to verify that. So at least 3 of the 4 are cut, then that would be acceptable. That would be permissible. Okay. Is there a disconnect in hunting? Oh, when you're hunting as well. So the difference here is that you are shooting the animal and you're going to go catch it immediately afterwards. So you're in the process of it and you're in the process of going after that animal. So there's a little bit of leeway, dispensation available because you just have to. I mean, there's no way around that. And that's inevitable. That's part of the hunting process. Whereas the same cannot be said about this manufactured slaughtering processes and a lot of these industrial style slaughters. Blunt force killing is no, blunt force killing is not okay ever. So what I explained is that the bullet that is used to kill the animal during hunting must pierce the flesh of the animal, meaning it should go through the animal. It should not just hit the animal and kill the animal from the hit or the force of that gunshot, but rather it should go through, because if it is killed that way through blunt force, that would not be okay, even in hunting. So for chicken, can the head be chopped off? It can. Again, it's makruh. It's not liked. It's disliked to cut the whole head off. And this is another argument. This is a good question. In a lot of Muslim countries, I have heard that they carry certain meats which are considered impermissible. So why would they have unlawful meat? The thing is, first and foremost, like I said in the slide all the way in the beginning, that as the world industrializes further and tries to become more and more efficient, what happens is that so do Muslims. And Muslims attempt to do the same thing, and they want to do that. They want to industrialize. They want to get faster. They want to, I don't remember exactly which slide it was, but, Muslims also want to follow suit. They want to get faster. They want to get more efficient. They want to become quicker. So they'll purchase cheaper chicken. They'll buy cheaper products that says halal on it. Now, I will mention that halal fraud does exist. Now, I'm going to speak about that next week. But the point is, and the takeaway from here is that fraud does exist. I mean, recently there was a huge article, totally public information, where there was halal fraud with Brazil chicken in Saudi Arabia. Some whatever $1 billion worth or a ton of money was lost when the birds that were delivered to Saudi Arabia were totally not even halal killed, but it was labeled as halal or some mishap like that. So the point is that it's not necessarily that a Muslim country would do that, but it's the lack of awareness that exists in the industry. And I know this may come as a surprise to many people, but the reality is a lot of people are unaware that these things occur, that there are these processes for slaughter that are taking place. Now, again, I'm reiterating this point. It doesn't mean that it cannot be done. It's just that the awareness needs to be brought. After that issue in Saudi Arabia, they switched and there was a huge emphasis on Saudi only chicken for Saudi Arabia. So what they actually had, they had started opening up quite a few slaughterhouses in Saudi Arabia that are known as Watani chicken or from the country itself. And those would all be done hand slaughtered according to the traditional method of slaughter. And so now, that's unfortunately due to a bad reason, but that's a better, that's a better process. And there's no issue now. It's not like there's a shortage of chicken now because they had to do it in Saudi Arabia. It's not even a matter of issues like, related to that. It's just the lack of awareness to the slaughtering process. So I hope that answers these questions here. Okay, inshallah. Let me just check the chat group one more time if there's anything else, and then we'll just wrap it up here. So there are certain bullets that are used, and I don't have all the knowledge on this, so forgive me for sounding ignorant. I don't have all the knowledge on this, but I do know that there are certain bullets that will pierce the flesh of the animal. They will, they will not be, essentially they will not be blunt force. So that way it creates a window for the hunter to then go either slaughter the animal once they find the animal, or it does kill the animal right away. So again, inshallah, I can look into this a little bit more, but I do know just from based on the research that I was doing that the Islamic conditions of that are such, and we have to sort of identify or kind of figure out how we're going to navigate that ourselves. That's really sort of the process. There are scholars that I know of that are hunters. They're very, public about it. They explain their processes. Maybe I can get in touch with them and see if they have anything that they can share. And inshallah, hopefully everyone is subscribed to our email list or our listserv. If not, I think, inshallah, we can share that one more time, our listserv or who to email. So that way we can get you on our listserv so I can share out some of that information on, documentation. I'll answer this last question and then we'll wrap it up. Oh, actually, no, that's seafood. So seafood will be for next week. So we'll discuss that for next week. There was one other question actually here. So a question came that, how do we understand the argument made that a machine can be understood as an extension of a person? The argument here actually needs to be understood as such that, is there a process that exists currently and in modern times where there's an individual who is standing upon a mechanical blade that only turns on every time a person presses the button or a lever or something, and then that individual says Bismillah, Allahu Akbar every single time? And then that there's someone to ensure that the chicken doesn't move, so that it doesn't move off the conveyor belt, or the belt line, so that it doesn't cut its stomach or its wing instead. Does something like that exist? If so, then the mashayikh and the scholars have said that there is room to consider that process. But the problem is that that's theoretical. It's not practical. It does not exist currently. And I think that would be very helpful to find a process that can do that. But I think at that point it defeats the purpose, the purpose, because the whole part of the blade is that efficiency, that speed, that unmatched speed, efficiency that you can achieve by having it all mechanized, versus having an individual person there to verify and to kind of the extra nuance of making sure the animal has died, the throat is cut, it bleeds out, all of that. So I am just proposing a counter idea that I don't think that process exists and it's more theoretical. But I will also give room to say that if there can be proof, valid proof, that process exists somewhere in the world, it would be worth considering. But with that being said, inshallah, we'll wrap it up. I've gone much over the time. I thank everyone for joining. Jazakumullahu khairan. I'll see everyone next week for the fourth and final dars that we'll be discussing seafood and also the practical implications. Jazakumullahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.